Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, along with Will Ragatz of Sports Illustrated, Andrew Krammer of the Star Tribune, for our weekly roundtable inside TCO Performance Center. And nothing to talk about. I guess we'll just get into the breakdowns between the offensive guards for the Falcons and the defensive tackles of the Vikings. And I mean, it should be a battle there with the running game. And
no Grady Jarrett.
I don't. Well, that actually is a factor. Jaren Hall's starting, if that hasn't been brought up yet. Where do you want to start with this one, Will?
Yeah, I thought we should maybe talk about special teams gunner matchups or third string running back. No, we are not hurting for things to talk about. Obviously, Kirk Cousins got hurt. That has been covered extensively on this podcast. And the trade deadline happened, and the Vikings went out and got Josh Dobbs. They continued to live in both worlds by trading Ezra Cleveland. They didn't trade Danielle Hunter. It's all kind of a fascinating puzzle coming together as a 4-4 team moves forward without its quarterback, without its leader. But I think we got to start and talk about the quarterback situation moving forward. And Andrew, what was your reaction to them going out to get somebody like Josh Dobbs, where he's been starting all year, he's shown some signs, but he also hasn't been great. And it's not the type of move of maybe going to get a Jacoby Brissett or a Jameis Winston or any of the outlandish possibilities that were floated. But it's also not like a Colt McCoy. Like, this is a guy who, realistically, unless Jaren Hall shows you a lot, he can be your starter and he can maybe get this team to the playoffs.
Yeah, after listening to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah talk to reporters Wednesday after the trade deadline, what became clear to me was this was the best they could do on a short list for a team that did not want to spend a ton of resources to go out and get something much better. And Josh Dobbs is somebody the Cardinals were looking to get rid of for the bottom price of a late round pick swap. And the Vikings said, yes, thank you. And Matt, we were talking before this podcast, maybe they were interested in a Jacoby Brissett type or something else, but this is an insurance policy. It's a veteran option. It's somebody who can at least make you relevant in some games against, an Atlanta Falcons, potentially if he were up to the task, but it's going to be Jaren Hall. But when they play later on, teams like the Bears on Monday night currently, or the Broncos, they'll still be able to win some games. And clearly Kevin O'Connell and his coaching staff thinks they can still go somewhere, even with a veteran quarterback. This to me said that Nick Mullins is not healthy enough to play right away, that they're also unsure of when he'll be ready to play. And that's why you get a guy like Dobbs to come in and at least guide this offense in a way that, frankly, Jaren Hall should not be expected to do as a fifth-round rookie. I understand the notion that fans want to see him and want to kind of give the rest of the season and see what you got. He has not been prepared to do that. He has not been given the first-team reps. He was not anywhere near sniffing that in training camp. And frankly, what we saw in training camp didn't give you confidence that you wanted to see much more right away. So I think Dobbs is the guy they bring in to make sure they don't have to play Jaren Hall much longer than Sunday.
The main goals seem to be, let's make sure we don't waste everybody's time, that we don't waste the time of Christian Darrisaw or Jordan Addison, and we're able to continue to develop Jordan Addison and make sure someone can throw him a reasonable football to give them a shot. And let's not waste Kevin O'Connell's time, because if you make it just Jaren Hall and he struggles and you don't have Mullins and then Sean Mannion's only your other quarterback, you're talking about losing a lot of football games and wasting a lot of people's season away. And I think there was a lot of push within the building to not do that. And Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, I thought it was interesting, spent a lot of time seemingly defending not trading away Danielle Hunter, including and sometimes there's these winding roads that he goes on to make a point. So you kind of have to follow along. And he was making a point about, if you're going to say that you're going to play relevant games all the time, at which he said that him and Kevin O'Connell agreed on this. We're going to play meaningful games all the time. Then if you're going to not play meaningful games, there has to be a really great reason why, which to me says no one offered us a first for Danielle Hunter. That's what it says to me.
Or maybe even a second.
Maybe. I mean, gosh, I feel like with Montez Sweat getting a second, but even then, like you said, that's not, but if they didn't, then that's what the compensatory pick is going to be, as a third rounder, more than likely. So that's kind of the point that's being made there. And you kind of have to go through with your finger and try to sort out, okay, what is he really trying to say to us here? And it seems to me that he said it wasn't worth it to tank to us, because we could have, but we didn't think that it had the value that maybe some people think it is. And he even made a point about other sports and how, he imagined himself sitting in the seat of other general managers. And if I was in that GM seat, I would trade this or that until you're the GM that actually has the organization that's looking at you in a lot of competing interests. And I guess I've started to think of this thing like a Big Brother house or whatever, like where, they would have some narrator or something. I've never seen the show. They would have someone being like, but Tony wanted them to, someone else to do the dishes or something. You know what I mean?
But
like
then there's Theo Epstein, and how did he handle it? And
right
in the house.
Yeah, just like these, but people having competing interests and wants and needs, and it being from the ownership to the players to the head coach. And this is why being a GM is way harder than we make it sound when we lay out all of their options. So that was kind of my feeling on the entire thing. And where Dobbs plays into it is, we weren't willing to give up anything that mattered to get someone better than Josh Dobbs. You guys may think he's going to make them relevant or keep them relevant. I'm not super confident in that after watching a little bit of Josh Dobbs, but I guess we'll get into that.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of interesting things that Kwesi said on Wednesday. I think that was probably the big one, that we want to play meaningful football games. But like you said, they're priced everything. And I get when fans think, oh, just roll with Jaren Hall. And worst case is you lose a bunch of games and you tank and you end up near the top of the draft board. But it's really not that simple when there's ownership talking about it. He said there's players texting him or talking to him and saying, we're gelling right now. We don't want you to trade away pieces. We want to keep going with this thing. And he's obviously going to make decisions, and that's not going to be a huge factor into it. But I think it's true that like the Vikings feel like even if they just get competent level quarterback play, they don't need somebody to come in and be Kirk Cousins, because that's not realistic. That's not going to happen. But if Jaren Hall takes some big step and he's been really developing behind the scenes and we haven't seen it, or if Josh Dobbs comes in, maybe it's a week from now against the Saints, or it's in 2 weeks or whatever, and he can play at the level that he showed earlier this season. The results have not been great for him. I think he's 1-9 as a starter, but that was also in the context of thrust into 2 games last year with the Titans, playing on maybe the worst team in football this year. Like, this is a huge upgrade in surrounding for him. And he beat the Cowboys earlier this year. Like, he has some juice to him as a thrower, as a dual threat. He can run with the ball. I think if they can just get baseline level play, like, they can be in a lot of games with the schedule that they have. So that's probably the logic from the Vikings. You're not going to win the Super Bowl this year without Kirk Cousins. It was already going to be tough to do so with Kirk Cousins, even if he continued playing at the level we saw over the last 2 weeks. But this way, at least I think you make a good point. You don't waste people's time, and you can move forward. And in the NFC, I mean, they're in the 7th seed right now. They're competing with like the 2 teams they play the next couple of weeks, the Falcons and the Saints, for that spot, and a few other teams. You can get in and see what happens. And I don't know, like, I get it. I get going to get Josh Dobbs, and he's almost certainly not going to be your option after this season. Jaren Hall is almost certainly not going to be your option after this season. But you're not throwing away the season and having to look at your players and essentially tell them that we're giving up on this thing when you've won 3 in a row.
Yeah, it's still going to be a gigantic change and shift. And Kevin O'Connell, when you listen to these coaches talk, you can tell how they're trying to kind of reconfigure the offense. O'Connell's talking about letting playmakers make plays, and talking about how when I used to talk at Kirk, before a play in the mic kind of communication, that I could understand what he's thinking and how he's responding to what I'm saying. All of that is going to be new with Josh Dobbs, the guy who's had no such training camp or practices or games together. How they adjust at the line is going to be different. How O'Connell's going to have to be more hands-on with what they run in a given play and not be able to adjust as much without Kirk Cousins at the line. All of these things are going to have to change. And I think credit to the coaching staff for being obviously aware of that, having a plan for Jaren Hall, even on Sunday at Lambeau, that was different than what Kirk Cousins was running. All of these things are good, and they will help them be relevant. So I say that to say that Josh Dobbs is probably getting the best coaching that he's gotten, and it will be in the best system with the best teammates that he's gotten. And that's why I think this team will be relevant, at least with Brian Flores and with what they're putting together with the schedule and all that. So Dobbs gives them a floor that I think is certainly much higher than Jaren Hall's and allows people to not waste their time, as you said.
I think there's levels of backup quarterbacks. There's probably 5 backup quarterbacks who could be starters if their teams weren't tanking, or just, there was no point to, say, Chicago having a really good backup quarterback. But like Teddy Bridgewater was 7-7 with Denver. He's the best Denver quarterback since Peyton Manning. So that's probably what Teddy Bridgewater would give you, is like 500 quarterback play. Jameis Winston, who knows? It could be like really good or horrendous.
The Panthers' best quarterback game this year was the one time they played Andy Dalton, but they have no reason to play Andy Dalton.
Right. With this team, Andy Dalton would give you a very legitimate shot to go 9-8. But if you're the Carolina Panthers, you're just like, I don't know, we kind of like Andy Dalton, and why? Seems like you guys really need a quarterback. So how about like a fourth? And it was very clear that they drew a line in the sand. We will only spend this much for our quarterback situation, which means you're not doing everything you possibly could have done. And Jacoby Brissett, there was the report out there that someone offered Washington a sixth and they didn't think it was enough. So they didn't do everything they could to possibly reach the playoffs this year, which I think is pretty commendable, because you don't raise a championship trophy by reaching the playoffs with Jacoby Brissett and then getting pounded into the ground by Seattle or something, right? So I think the way that they handled it was good, but I also think that maybe I guess I'm skeptical of how many games they can actually win under these circumstances, because that level of quarterback, Dobbs, in my mind, is not really that close to that. Like the guys who have started and won games and everything else, I think he's at the level of barely in the NFL, and like an AJ McCarron type of level quarterback. And he's got one game where we've seen anything other than that in the entire NFL. And the game he gets praised for the most, he threw a game-losing interception. I don't know. I mean, I think they went out of their way to stay as hard on the competitive rebuild path. Well, no one thinks we're tanking, but we're definitely not actually competing for anything. And it's a weird place to be.
It sounds like a hidden rebuild almost. Like we're going to rebuild, but we really don't want it to seem like we're rebuilding.
Right. Yeah, right. Let me think of, you guys talk, I'll think of a metaphor for this. But I mean, it really feels that way.
Yeah.
That you're doing, okay, I've got it. It's the way that I do my yard work. So I have a neighbor that does beautiful work with their yard. I mean, they've got flowers and they've got plants and all sorts of stuff. And they, when it's a drought, they'll water it and everything. Here's what I do. When the grass gets a little too long, I chop it down. And it's good enough. It's okay, no one's going to think I'm a dirtbag for letting my lawn get all completely out of control. But also, I'm not really trying here. It's just do good enough so it looks okay. But I'm not trying to win any competitions for how good my yard is. Folks, we are going all in on Prize Picks this football season. Every week we are playing and testing out our skills here on Purple Insider to see if we can predict what numbers players will put up every Sunday. If you haven't heard of it, trust me, you're going to want to check it out. Prize Picks is the easiest and best way to play daily fantasy. Instead of battling against thousands of other players and people who spend their entire lives doing fantasy, all you do is pick more or less on between 2 and 6 player stat projections. So say a quarterback's number is 250.5 yards, go more or less and bang, you are playing. And you can pick from hundreds of players and numbers this football season. The cool thing is that it's quick and easy and does not cost an arm and a leg. You can turn $10 into $250 just like that. Again, the perfect way to fit it into a busy day. Click, and you're playing. This isn't just something that I like. You're going to hear us doing every single week, Prize Picks on the show on Purple Insider. So go to prizepicks.com/purple and use the code PURPLE for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/purple with the code PURPLE. Daily fantasy sports made easy.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more optimistic about the Dobbs thing, and I don't know if that's, I mean, I really haven't dived into the tape or whatever on him, but I think just from some of the glimpses I've seen, in the context of what the Vikings have with the offensive line, with the pass catchers, with the defense, I mean, the reason they brought him in, I think a big reason is he's been asked to do this several times, to pick up an offense right away. Last year with Tennessee, they signed him and they thrust him in as a starter for 2 games quickly. This year he got traded from the Browns to the Cardinals on August 25th or something, and he was starting week 1, and he picked that offense up. And Kevin O'Connell's offense is we've heard a lot from Kirk Cousins and people over the years about how hard it is to learn, but I think a somewhat simplified version, he might be able to pick up and go by next week against the Saints. So I think he gives you something. I just, to me, it feels like they're going to be in games if the defense continues playing at this level, because this is now 3 or 4 games in a row where the Brian Flores defense has played at a high level, and you come away thinking, wow, that was a really good game plan for that opponent. To be fair, the Packers offense is, I think, the worst they've played all year, and that includes Tyson Bagent coming in with the Bears. Like that, they were dropping everything. They couldn't do a thing, but give a little credit to Brian Flores and his game plan and the way Josh Metellus is playing and the way like even DJ Wanham has shown some sparks. I think they're just going to be in like these 17-17 games in the third quarter, and they're going to have a chance to win. And Josh Dobbs has made a lot of mistakes this year. He's got like 13 turnover-worthy plays, according to PFF. But he can throw the ball to the right spot sometimes, and he can run the ball. And like he gives you a much higher floor than Jaren Hall. I think we can agree on that. So in that sense, I get it, but it's a weird, the whole competitive rebuild thing is weird because you go get Josh Dobbs, and then at the same time you trade away Ezra Cleveland and you weaken your offensive line depth, and then you don't trade Danielle Hunter. And it's like, I know that there's a price for all of these things, but it's just, it's tough to see which world they're trying to live in. I don't know.
Let me just ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
With Kirk Cousins, who is playing great, how many multiple score wins did they have this year?
They had one.
One in Green Bay, which, I mean, Green Bay had many chances to not make that a 1-score win. So we're thinking that Josh Dobbs is able to do the same then.
Well, we're
Close.
also we're thinking this stretch of the schedule is a lot easier than the one they just went through.
Yes.
We're thinking that Russell Wilson, Derek Carr, who is
Taylor
it?
Heineke this weekend.
Yeah, Taylor Heineke.
Vikings
I mean, I just think that they're going to be in enough close games and maybe score a couple more defensive touchdowns where the water level is going to be low enough that I do think they will win a few more games. I'm not saying they're going to even be above 500 by the end of the year. This might be very well a 7-10 team, and they're shooting at best for that. But that is the floor that they want to be at. And to your point, not waste anybody's time. Like the stats that TJ Hawkinson puts up or whatever, this is still going to be an offense that can operate and be able to be a second half of a season that produces something for this team. And to your point, they decided that's the line we're drawing of being somewhat relevant because we cannot invest anything more to be anything more than that.
Now, you guys, you could be right. Like they might, because their pass catchers and pass protection are so good and the defense has come together, they very well could be in every one of these games. I also think that Imagination Land is a place that we live in a lot when it comes to quarterbacks. Like, but if he only does this, I mean, imagine if he can like just do this. And I don't know about that. I mean, because my career before here was in Buffalo, where they would run out like Kelly Holcomb or Jeff Toole or EJ Manuel, and we would have the same discussions. Well, they have good receivers, and if they could only just do this and this and this, and then they'd win 4 games. It was.
But what's the difference between what we're saying? If I'm saying 7 and 10, are you just saying 4 and like they don't win another game?
No.
What would you set their over under on wins at?
No, I think 7 is fine.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just saying that like when you talk about, can they actually be in this playoff race? I'm really going to need to see that, because the drop off, and this is where I think the discussion will eventually go by the end of the season, will be the drop off from Kirk Cousins to a guy who could be playing in the XFL next year is pretty massive. And I'm sorry, Josh Dobbs, you seem like a really smart guy, way smarter than me, way better at sports than me, but I'm going to have to see you do something better than 1-9. In order to believe that there's anything more there, because we've seen this level of quarterback play a lot in the NFL. And Nick Mullins is probably better than Josh Dobbs.
Yeah.
And when he played for San Francisco, they went like 4-12. It's a hard league. Like there's just not that, there's not many people who can do what Kirk Cousins does. And I think it's going to help his case. By the end of the year, I think it's going to help his case, because Kevin O'Connell's going to be like, boy, we can do a lot of stuff with Kirk Cousins that we can't do with these backup quarterbacks, which is another discussion of how we read that situation with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's comments.
I think there's a very good chance you're right, and they really struggle, whether it's Jaren Hall, whether it's probably going to be Josh Dobbs, and they win 2 or 3 more games the rest of the way. To me, I just look around at the other teams, the teams on their schedule, the other teams that are in the race for the 7th seed, I'm like, these are bad teams with quarterback play that isn't that far above that bar that you would maybe say Josh Dobbs could potentially get to.
Yeah, he's no better than or worse than Desmond Ritter.
Desmond,
Yeah.
he's better than Desmond Ritter.
Yeah, Taylor Heineke.
I think he's better than Jordan Love.
I'd rather have Taylor Heineke than Dobbs, but
maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I guess we won't see them face off this weekend. But like, yeah, you're facing Taylor Heineke and you're facing the Broncos and whoever. I don't know. Is it going to be Aiden O'Connell when they play the Raiders? Like, you're not telling me that guy's better than Josh Dobbs. I mean, I know he's 1-9, but
am I not telling you that guy? Like these again. Like I know Arizona's bad, but the guys
Arizona had nothing.
1-9. He's like, I mean, I know. But
at least James Conner could run.
Not all. Okay, QB wins, whatever. Okay, all right. But is there any other metric to suggest he's been good? I looked at all of them. I couldn't find much.
I do not think he obviously has not been good in the context of talking about all the starters who have played this year. I just think there's a little bit of a dual threat element that if Kevin O'Connell can lean into could be interesting.
I don't know, baby.
Maybe I'm just trying to talk myself into the season, the rest of the season being interesting. I think there's a chance. I guess let's talk about this weekend though. With Jaren Hall, it's a tough spot for him to be thrown into, and all the talk this week has been, hey, like don't try to think about whether this game means you're going to have an NFL career or not. And Kevin O'Connell was saying, like, I used to think about that in my playing career, and obviously it kind of was for him, and he didn't play well, and he didn't last very long as a quarterback. And he said he's been sharing that with Jaren Hall, and Jaren Hall's been saying, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do as well. That's kind of the reality. Like, if he doesn't play well this week, who knows if he starts the game in the NFL again? Like, this is his one opportunity, and I have no idea what to expect because the preseason was kind of a mess. He looked really raw. Even just watching him in training camp, he looked really raw. I guess there's a sliver of a chance that he has been progressing and he comes out and he plays pretty well, but I don't think that we can expect that at all.
If you told me in August, if all of us sitting there watching training camp and you came up and say, hey, they're going to go to Atlanta in week 9?
Week 9.
And they're not going to have Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, or Marcus Davenport. How do you think it's going to go?
Or Nick Mullins.
Or their backup quarterback.
Yeah.
I think, Matt, when you talk about this getting ugly, I think the ugliest it might look is this Sunday. I think the ugliest it might look is having to throw this young guy into the fire like this against a team that, when you look at Atlanta's games, their defense is not lights out, but they have been playing pretty sound in terms of keeping points down, keeping yardage somewhat manageable. It's hard to score typically on this Falcons team for many offenses, and it will be for Jaren Hall. It will be for a Vikings offense that also can't run the ball. They still can't run it with Madison or Akers. And Dalton Reisner was not much better on Sunday. They had 25 carries for 50 yards as running backs behind Dalton Reisner at guard. This wasn't an Ezra Cleveland problem. This was many people's issue in this blocking scheme and at running back because these running backs are not creating. So I think the ugliest it's going to look is Sunday. I think Jaren Hall doesn't have much of a chance. I think Taylor Heineke has, a skill group that if you're stacking them up with the Vikings, even without Jefferson, is pretty great. So I think they're going to, I think the only way the Vikings pull this game out is if Arthur Smith does some real Arthur Smith stuff.
I was gonna mention that.
This is the one area I would give you is I think that the Vikings have one of the best coaching staffs in the NFL, from their head coach to their defensive coordinator to their position coaches, which I mean, Keenan McCardle cannot be overstated how good Keenan McCardle is at his job. Nobody ever talks about Keenan McCardle because he's a receivers coach, and we don't know what a receivers coach does because he doesn't call plays. But this is a guy that Jefferson fought for to stay when they fired Mike Zimmer, and that has paid off. I mean, you see the development of Jordan Addison.
Jordan Addison's second in the league in receiving touchdowns, like among all play, not among rookies, among all players.
Which, look, it's because he's a first-round pick and he's very talented. But, we just see progress from every one of their receivers under Keenan McCardle, including Justin Jefferson, continuing to get better. And I think that in comparison, Arthur Smith, I'm not sure has any idea what he's doing. And shout out to Kurt Warner, who put out a video of some of the offensive play designs, which were just astounding. Like what is going on with this? And maybe the quarterback wasn't making the right checks. I don't know. But just things that would blow your mind for how bad some of their passing concepts were. that's what I think could keep them in the game, is that they do have this really good defensive coordinator who's elevated the play, and they do have, an offensive mind that can probably adapt. I just think this is a lot to ask from Jaren Hall. He was never supposed to be starting at this point. He was supposed to develop and eventually maybe become a Nick Mullins. I don't think there was ever this idea that he was like a big time prospect. And usually if that was going to happen, we would have seen in training camp, in preseason, these signs. So it could be a rough ride for them. But if they're going to stay in it, it's just finding a way to scheme around that. I think, one thing is, from college to the NFL, it's just so much faster. And he took a lot of sacks in preseason.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure how that's supposed to translate in 1 week.
He took a strip sack on like his second drop back at Lambeau. And that was not a great rep for Christian Darrisaw against Preston Smith, but it's going to be really tough for Jaren Hall. I think if they had a good or even competent run game, that would give me a little more confidence that they could kind of manage things for Jaren Hall and put him in like third and shorts and have these schemed up looks for him and throws that aren't that difficult. And you don't have to be doing full field reads like Kirk Cousins. But I don't know. This is going to be the ultimate test of Kevin O'Connell as a game plan designer, as a play caller, as a coach, as somebody who can adjust on the fly on a week where you lose Kirk Cousins and you have to go with Jaren Hall. Like, can they even put up 14 points on offense or something and maybe get a defensive touchdown and use the formula they used in the Bears game, where, to be fair, they didn't do anything on offense in the second half and they still found a way to win. That was against the Bears and Tyson Bagent, and I think the Falcons are a little bit more competent than that. It's a 4-4 team, despite Desmond Ridder being maybe the worst starter in the league and turning the ball over more than he scored touchdowns and things like that. But like you said, the skill position talent, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, it's a solid offensive line. The defense, I don't know. They've been pretty good against the run, at least according to the metrics, and not very good against the pass. And now they lose Grady Jarrett. But there are some NFL players on that defense, and they're probably going to blitz the heck out of Jaren Hall with Ryan Nielsen, who the Vikings interviewed for defensive coordinator before they hired Ed Donatel. They're just going to find ways to make it tough on Jaren Hall, and that's why I don't have a ton of optimism for this week. I just think moving forward, when you talk about the Broncos and the Bears and the Raiders, I think Josh Dobbs can have you in those games and win some of them, but this week could be tough.
Yeah, I think this is, and I'm not breaking news here, it's going to be a boring game to watch because not just the quarterback matchup, but I think the coaches are going to call the game, the offensive play callers are going to call the game accordingly and be conservative and understand that it's probably going to come down to which quarterback doesn't make the catastrophic play. Which quarterback doesn't give up the defensive touchdown, which quarterback doesn't, the strip sack, pick six, whatever, because both guys are absolutely capable of doing that on Sunday. And both defenses are capable of creating that havoc. And I think O'Connell's going to be incredibly conservative. We're going to see probably a lot of 3 and outs. It's just going to be, Ryan Wright is going to have to be the star for the Vikings in this game.
Big Ten West football.
Yep.
Is it going to look like Giants Jets last week with Tommy DeVito versus Zach Wilson? I don't know. These are two calamity franchises that always find ways to have hilarious things happen to them. So maybe this is a 42-38 game that we never saw coming. My premonition crystal ball is not telling me exactly what's going to happen here, the way it did against San Francisco. But one thing that has been brought up that I'm curious about your guys' opinion, though, is the idea of this being a test case for Kevin O'Connell. I do not look at it that way because I remember what backup quarterbacks look like. It's been so long since the Vikings have had to play one.
They look like Kevin O'Connell.
Or Sean Mannion, what he did against Green Bay. We've seen so many of them come in against the Vikings, and you're like, oh, well, I expected the Vikings to beat them. And because we cover them, we give the defense credit when they play against the bad quarterback and succeed. It's like, well, great job, defense. On their side, their podcasts are like, oh, my God, why do I have to watch this backup play so bad? Do you folks remember Spurgeon Wynn? How did that go? Hey, Todd Bauman had some moments, I will say, though.
You don't have to look back that far in Vikings history.
Yeah, you always go back to
Sean Hill and Brooks Bollinger and Gus Farrar was actually pretty good.
No,
Yeah.
Gus was a beast.
Gus had
Yeah.
some
But
moments.
Gus was more of the level of a quarterback who could be a starter.
Yeah.
Like that's like what we're talking about, the difference between that and a Jaren Hall, or in my mind, a Josh Dobbs. I mean, I'm like the guy with the sign, like, prove me wrong. Like, I'm going to have to see it when we, talk about these reasons why he hasn't been good in Arizona. But I don't even think there's really been signs. This is sort of a Josh McCown level quarterback who, like, everyone loves, but can't actually win anything unless there's like that one little time he played with Chicago. So, but Kevin O'Connell as a test case with these backup quarterbacks, I do not look at it that way because of the quality of quarterback, but maybe you guys see it differently.
No, I don't. I don't think. I mean, if it's an absolute disaster the rest of the way with Hall and Dobbs, that gives you a little bit of pause. But it's hard to put this on O'Connell. I don't think there's any sort of situation where his job depends on winning 3 more games or 4 more games or something like that. I just talking about the old like Vikings quarterbacks of the past. I think the bar for this game has to be like Joe Webb, Josh Freeman.
Oh, man.
Can they clear that? And I think Jaren Hall probably can, but I'm also not positive of that. I was at the 2012 playoff game where Joe Webb started, and people were upset that Christian Ponder was ruled out, which was kind of a weird sensation. But that is the bar to clear here.
It was a great first drive, though.
Oh,
with
it
Webb.
was. That field goal, right?
Yeah,
They
he
got
was
on the
running.
board.
He was running, and it was like, oh, let's keep doing that, and then they just stopped running.
And then it all fell apart. So that's the bar to clear. I don't know how much better than that it's going to be. The one case you have is just the pieces, and I think they're going to be conservative. They're going to try to just make it a straightforward game plan for Jaren Hall. I think they should just come out first play of the game, do a play action boot, and throw one like 60 yards downfield to Jordan Addison and see what happens. But that would probably end up in a strip sack touchdown for the Falcons.
Yeah. No 7-step drops right out of the gate. I don't think you need that. I do think this, if Kevin O'Connell avoids a joke of a game that we talk about 10 years later, like Josh Freeman, success. Yeah. And I don't think they're capable of that with this coaching staff because, as you mentioned, Matt, this is a very well-coached team. They are going to make it not totally embarrassing. It's just going to be a grind of a game that whoever scores the first touchdown and maybe a couple field goals ends up winning.
Let's I mean, unless you have something else, we'll talk about our predictions at the end. I think we've already kind of made them clear, but let's talk about next year because the Kirk Cousins thing is fascinating to me. And there's this sense that I've been getting that like maybe Kirk Cousins' injury actually makes it more likely he's back next year. I don't know. And you've talked about this. Like he got injured after 2 of the best games of maybe his career, certainly of the last few years with the Vikings. And now everybody's remembering those and they're thinking about the way he was playing. And that's fair. But also that means he never got the opportunity to have another bad stretch of games and kind of remind everybody what he's done over the years with the Vikings. And at a certain price, like let's say the Vikings get to even 7-10, maybe 8-9. I don't know what you do at quarterback if you don't feel like you can trade up for the Caleb Williams, Drake May tier. And there are going to be a lot of other teams that are interested in those 2 players. It might come down to, do you like JJ McCarthy or somebody like that? Or do you just talk yourself into? And I think Kevin O'Connell, at least in his public comments, he really likes Kirk Cousins and what he was doing in this offense. I could see him being on the side of the discussion with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah that let's bring Kirk Cousins back, and his market's going to be a little bit deflated because of this injury, and he's 36 years old and all that. And Kwesi might have to, I don't know, push back against that. What's your sense of the chances of Kirk Cousins being back in 2024?
You guys ever watch Pawn Stars?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I have not.
All right. So
I think I know the concept.
I can give you a 6th-round pick.
Kwesi is the bald guy behind the counter. And Kirk Cousins is the guy who brings in a guitar that supposedly Jimi Hendrix breathed on. And he says, I want $10,000 for my Jimi Hendrix guitar. And the guy goes, can't do it.
$5.
I'll give you $120.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, okay, all right, 4,000. He's like, $140. And then that either works out or it doesn't. I think the same thing is going to happen with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and the Vikings and Kirk Cousins' agent, where it's going to be like, how about like 25 mil? How about 45 mil? How about 27 mil? And I don't know if you get those two close enough because the cap situation is clear. And when flexibility got brought up, I saw a little halo come up over Kwesi's head, just like a shining light, like flexibility at quarterback. Woo, like the angels spoke to him and so forth. He seemed to get excited about that, and me too, because I think that you're right that you can always talk yourself into Kirk. That's why he's still here, because you can always talk yourself into Kirk. But the money and the totality of the time here, and by the way, they're a 4-4 team. This is not 8-0. They're 4-4. Like I know he played great. No one's taking it away. They're 4-4. They're not 8-0. If they lost him when they were 7-1 and they looked like a Super Bowl team and he was vastly different than he was before, then, okay, I would understand trying to make that move that we could say it's O'Connell's magic or whatever else. I don't think he's any really vastly different than he was before. And how could you ever say it's going to get better after this?
I think they could I think this is the devil's advocate. And Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said this. He said, when we were 1-4, I didn't feel like we were 1-4. Like they could be very easily 6-2 with absolutely normal turnover luck. And I know that's the if thing, but that's also over the last month, he cited this. They've been top 10 in offensive efficiency. They've been top 10 in defensive efficiency. I'm not saying that this is what you should do, but I'm saying you could talk yourself into the way this team was playing the last 2 weeks being more of a contender than they had ever been in the Kirk Cousins era. And I don't still know how much of a contender that is.
You could talk yourself into pretty much every team over a month. That's not horrible. I mean, right? Like if you look at the other metrics, like just points for, points against, expected points added, scoring percentage on drives, all those things. This is an average NFL team. Like over a bigger sample, not, hey, let's cut out the games where it wasn't that great. And then it looks pretty good. Let's cut out Greg Joseph's missed field goals. Then he's amazing. But we can't do that. And the same thing is like, we can't cut out of my brain what happened in Carolina with Kirk Cousins. We cannot cut out what happened in Chicago where they couldn't move the football. Mm-hmm. We can't cut out where Philadelphia ran for 260 yards on them just because they were better against the horrific running game of the Green Bay Packers. This has always been a competitive rebuild average football team. And so, I mean, yeah, you can make that case. But how are you going to get to a great football team without cap space? That would be the question. Like with having to bring Cousins back and then into the future over the next couple of years, build a Super Bowl contender. How does that happen if he is here? And that's always been the fundamental question. And if we're going to project a guy coming off of an Achilles injury to return to the play he was before, which I don't still think was good enough to win a Super Bowl. Like pretty tough sell for me. But I could see the head coach loving him so much that they want to talk themselves into it. And to me, that's talking yourselves right into 8-9 next year.
I think the crux of this is how do they view Kirk as that player? And before the injury, they did not view him, to my understanding, they did not view him as an elite, what you call, blue chip prospect or however. They viewed him in that tier underneath. And now did that change because of his play in year 2? Well, Kwesi said this is what we thought it would look like in terms of year 2 in the system. So I don't know if it really did change much in terms of his play, elevating their view of him. Now you throw in the Achilles injury as you're talking about, 35-year-old. It's nice that Kwesi talks about this is not a normal 35-year-old, what he does in terms of recovery, all these things will help him. I believe all that, but that is no different than what most of these athletes are doing. They're all pouring their blood, sweat, and tears into the recoveries and treatment of their bodies. He's going to recover at the way that modern medicine will allow anybody to. But this injury is going to continue to deteriorate who he is physically like it would anybody. And so I don't think much has changed. If I had to guess, I think they view him the same as they did before. I think they thought how he played the last 2 games was how they envisioned it in a perfect Kirk Cousins environment, and that they're not going to get starstruck by that notion of, well, maybe this is now a Super Bowl contender with him. They're going to try to build the best team around him if they still have him. But I think they're also going to draw that hard line like they did with Josh Dobbs of, we can only spend so much on you, Kirk, because of how we view you as a player. And if you're going to demand more than that, then as Kwesi said, it's a two-way street. I just because I want him back doesn't mean we're going to be able to bring him back.
Yeah, I to be clear, I'm not advocating for bringing Kirk Cousins back. I have never been
Ragatz, bring Kirk back.
I have never been the biggest pro Kirk guy, and I think the way that they've kind of dragged it along has been actually a little silly at times. And it's just going to come down to the question that we've asked year after year after year after year, and it's what else do you do? But I think the answer has to be something else, anything else, and draft somebody, even if it's not one of those top two guys. Take a chance on a J.J. McCarthy or a Shadur Sanders or Michael Penix, even though he's like 28 years old with no ACLs. Like just something different that gives you, after Kirk's dead cap hit in 2024, that gives you that flexibility to fill in the pieces around Darrisaw and Jefferson and whoever else your core guys are.
I don't know if you're the one to make fun of people's age versus what we expect, Will. Not so sure about that. No, I think, well, look, every quarterback that gets drafted, there's going to be a reason not to draft them. Yeah. There always is. Well, he doesn't have any ACLs and he's old, or he doesn't have great footwork like that Patrick Mahomes guy, or, hey, that Josh Allen, he's just not accurate enough, or Jalen Hurts, man, I don't know. He's just a running quarterback. Lamar Jackson can't throw. Like every quarterback who ever makes it that isn't the number one overall pick always has some reason not to draft them. The trouble is, to me, it's always the interpersonal thing that's interesting. On paper, black and white, this is an easy call for me. It's an easy call. History is not kind to guys his age that are not someone who's an all-time great. And the Achilles thing, the previous performance, the success, it's an easy black and white call. But when you have owners, when you have a coach, when you have other coaches on the staff, when you have players who clearly care deeply about Kirk Cousins, I mean, that's where it becomes a lot more complicated, because if you do say, goodbye, Kirk, happy trails, hope your Achilles heals, but going to be healing somewhere else, and then you draft Michael Penix and he's not good enough, and then and Kirk goes to whoever and plays well, then oh no, like we look foolish. And then the coach is going to say, well, I always loved Kirk. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I think it was really the general manager who talked me out of it. And not that we would ever see anything like that here before. Oh, wait. Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened with Zimmer, except the opposite. So that's where the decision becomes truly fascinating to me. But we actually have to go to the locker room very shortly. So you guys want to talk about what you think happens in the game? You got a score? You got a prediction? Do you want to try to predict it?
6-3.
Yeah. What's the over under on this game?
Take the under.
Maybe take the under.
Take the under,
regardless of what it is.
I think Iowa's going to be watching this game though for ideas.
Yeah. I'm really tempted to zig and just continue. I've sort of been like the good cop here and arguing that it might be better than people think, and so I'm tempted to take the Vikings in this game. Yeah, actually, you know what? I'm going to do it. Okay. You know what? Let's do it. Let's lean in. I'm going to take the Vikings to win this game, 16-13, with a defensive touchdown and 3 field goals.
Okay, I'll go with Atlanta 21-17. I think I don't have a whole lot of respect for Atlanta's coach and for their ability to deal with this, but I just think it's a really, really tough task for a backup quarterback to come in. So I think it will be competitive. I think it will be close, even though I kind of made fun of you guys earlier for saying that. And it's mostly about Atlanta and Arthur Smith, whose mustache
and no
is
Grady
insane.
Jarrett's legitimately sort of a fact, like their best defensive player.
I do. Yeah. In all seriousness, I think the Vikings lose this game, but it'll be 20-16, something like that, where I think the Vikings touchdown comes from the defense.
All right. Well, that was a lot of fun.
Or maybe it's a 54-yard Jaren Hall rushing touchdown, and he breaks 4 tackles on his way to the end zone.
No hugs this week from anybody. No one was in a hugging mood. I thought that maybe someone would want to be consoled over Kirk because they did act like he died. He's fine. I saw it on Instagram. He's okay.
He's got a purple cast.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, just more posturing from Kirk to return. See more at Pro Football. No, stop it. All right. Anyway. Love you all. We'll talk again soon after the football game. Good day.